next thing I knew, I was flying up to North Carolina, and like my world just flipped. And I went from this kind of survival driver, right? I'm just literally 20 some years old trying to survive week to week, not knowing how you're going to get to a racetrack, to having a legitimate ride.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. California's Kevin Harvick does it. Straight making right there. You're the man.
Welcome to Kevin Harvick's Happy Hour, presented by NASCAR on Fox. We encourage our closers to follow us on YouTube or anywhere else on social media at Harvick Happy Pod. And today we have a great interview guest. For me, this is probably one of the interviews that I've requested many times and look forward to the most with Brad Keselowski. To me, it's very intriguing with his departure from Penske and starting everything that he did at RFK, and now to see them have success in winning races and Brad winning races himself. I've got a lot of questions, so let's get into it. Well, Brad, thanks for coming by. It's good to have you in the chair. It always makes the interview a little bit more personal when you have somebody that's not on the screen there that you're looking into a Zoom call. But first, thanks for coming. But let's get right into Iowa. I think as I looked at it from the repave, and I'm like, oh man, this could be a mess. But the race was okay. Yeah. And what from your perspective was the weekend like, from the repave, from the car? How was the first event at Iowa?
Whenever they repave a track, it's there's always a lot of unknowns, and the way they decided to repave Iowa was kind of like nothing I'd ever seen before. Yeah. We've seen, and Kevin, you remember when Pocono did like the grip strip. So it's not uncommon for them to repave like one particular lane, but for them to do like half of two lanes on both corners, it just really threw everybody kind of for a loop. And so, what's always interesting about repaves, is just how dynamic the track is to me. You go out for a practice session and, your first lap on the racetrack, you're spinning out. And then, by the end of the race, like I was so tight, I could barely drive the car. And so just that migration of how you drive the car and how much it changes, it's almost like a dirt track, in a sense, So, it ended up being a good race, I feel like, because both lanes ended up kind of working and they came in. But when we started the weekend, it was pretty much like, hey, I can barely make a lap. And by the time it was done, it was like, well, I can barely make a lap, but not because I'm about to spin out, but because I'm going to blow the right front tire off this car. So just a huge shift in the race as it goes. And, I think that's one of the things that I try to explain to people who are fans of other forms of racing. They're like, well, you guys they're like two turns and it's just an oval. You're like, yeah, but the tracks are dynamic. Yeah. Where IndyCar, Formula One, whatever it might be, like the track's pretty much the same unless it rains. But in NASCAR, it's like, oh, we ran 10 laps in this lane. Now that lane's not any good anymore. Let's move to the next one. And just the technique change of how to make that all work is really difficult. Yeah.
And I've heard, several different opinions on whether they should have repaved the track. I mean, I'm of the opinion they shouldn't have touched it. They should have just patched it for the first one just to get through it like we did at North Wilkesboro, because Iowa was the dynamic of Iowa was so unique with the way you could start on the bottom or the middle and then work your way to the top, and you had options. But I'm of the opinion now you need to just dig it up and repave the whole thing, because it looked pretty rough from the in-cars that we saw this weekend. So it looks like those patches basically are repaved. The patches in and off of them are pretty rough.
Yeah, getting into turn one for sure. The car would jump and bounce. And I'm with you. Sometimes you got to just reset and redo the whole track. What's interesting about Iowa is you go back to the history of it. When it was built in, I guess, 05, 06, it was actually made by a paving company. So it was a paving company that owned the track, that built the track. And, interesting because to me, it actually held up pretty well for almost 20 years. But, these surfaces, I kind of joke about it. And you remember when Richmond used to do the sealer and all that. Yeah. When you watch any other sport, like when the field's pristine, you're like, oh, that's a good field. But like a racetrack, it's almost the opposite. Like you want it to not look good. Like you want it to have like some scars and character to it, right? Because that puts the drivers in a position where I think their kind of expertise really shows up. So it's like when somebody says, well, they should repave it. Like initially you're like, is there anything we can do? You remember Atlanta, like maybe we could like put some seams, you're like pasting this thing together. Yes.
Yeah. Put some patches in.
But eventually you get to a point where you're like, all right, stop. You just got to redo it. And I think that's probably where Iowa is.
Yeah. And I think from a fan perspective, it put on a good enough show to say, hey, we probably need to go back there. But from a market standpoint, I would assume from the teams, that's a great addition to the schedule from a sales standpoint and marketing.
Yeah, I think our sport goes through these kinds of ebbs and flows where I have to be careful what I say here. I don't get too much trouble, Kevin. But I think we go through these ebbs and flows though, where we're like, hey, let's go to big market X, whatever that might be, LA, Chicago, New York, pick your kind of big market of the day, or maybe it's international. And we get kind of excited about the idea of competing in these markets that, they might have 10 million people living in the city or whatever it might be. And sometimes we kind of just lose sight of the fact of why don't we just serve the fans we already have?
Yeah.
And, I think it takes a balancing act. And what I saw in Iowa, and I loved it, by the way, was fans that they wanted us there.
Passionate.
Yeah, passionate fans are like, we've been waiting my entire life. And I did an autograph signing Friday, and there were people that were, hey, I live 2 hours away. This is the closest track to me, and I've waited my entire life for there to be a cup race close by, and I finally have it, and it means the world to me. And those are the fans that come back. Like they don't just go for 1 year just to see what this is all about, but they love our sport. And I just think that sometimes we forget about that. We're kind of chasing the new shiny thing of whatever market it might be. And the other thing I really liked about Iowa, and I'm not from anywhere close to Iowa, but I'm from Michigan, which is considered the Midwest. But all the sponsors that sponsored the race were kind of brands that you didn't see anywhere else, like Hy-Vee or Casey's or, Iowa Corn. Like you don't see those anywhere else. And it's always great to bring kind of fans that are underserved, but also brands that are underserved, because that really serves, for me, the business model of our sport. So, and then kind of lastly, one of the things I look for in a great event is, does it have the support of the community, not just the fans, but kind of the government or whoever.
Do they know you're there?
Yeah. Do you know you're there? And when the governor shows up for your race, like that's a big deal. That tells me the community wants you there. And I just have this simple kind of philosophy in all things in my life, like go where you're wanted. And it was clear Iowa wanted NASCAR.
Yeah, and I think, the Iowa to Los Angeles market, right? We always try so hard to be in Los Angeles, and it's not the same reception that you get when you go to a place like Iowa. It's a much different reception because the fans are there.
And Kevin, I always kind of parlay that into the conversation of those big markets. They seem to like us a lot better when we go to the small markets that are crazy about us. Yeah. There's that little bit of kind of, I don't know, it's like jaded ex-lover or whatever it is, where they like you a lot better when they see you're dating another girl.
Yeah.
And I always feel that way. So it's like you can go to those big markets. This is just my opinion. Like you can go to those big markets, but you got to go to them for like 1 or 2 years and then leave them.
That's right.
1 or 2 years, then leave. Like you got to like get in and get out and then go back to the places that are crazy about you and kind of like build it back up.
Yeah. And I look back at the Clash and when we went to Los Angeles that first year, if we'd have left the first year,
it'd been awesome.
It would have been fantastic.
Yes.
And wherever you would have taken it next would have been
100%.
Over the top because they would have been excited. And we went back the second year, still could have got away with it. It was okay. Yep. Third year was too much. And so
100%.
From a team owner business perspective, what is your opinion of the international? Like I look at Montreal and I know we couldn't get that all worked out with everything that happened with Montreal for the Cup side of things. But every time I ever went to Montreal from an Xfinity standpoint, packed fans, very passionate, 100%. Always had some Canadians in the stands. Mexico City should have went 1 year.
Yes, that's a perfect case study.
And not go back. But how do you guys view that from a business standpoint internationally?
Well, I like international races to some degree. I mean, obviously it's more expensive to go there. And, the problem with Canada right now is they've got the jock tax thing, which from a business perspective is a killer, right? Yeah. When you pay, like anything else, when you pay an exorbitant tax, you lose a lot of money. And it's that money, you have to go back and you have to charge, whether it be the fans or the partners, to try to recoup it. And it's really difficult to make a business case out of that. But outside of the business case, I look at the markets, and I think it's a good to go to those places for 1 or 2 years and kind of take a break, then come back. But I also look at it as, the challenges of kind of what irks me about it is I wish when we went to these international events that they were ovals.
Yeah.
One of the things I liked about Iowa, and I'm just going to throw all kinds of flowers on Iowa because I thought it was great, but
it was great.
One of the things I love about Iowa is a new track on the NASCAR Cup Series circuit. And for the first time in what feels like forever, it was an oval. Like, I feel like the last half a dozen new tracks we've added, like a road course.
Yeah.
And like a road course is kind of like the easy thing to do, right? To add a new road course to the schedule. There's plenty of them. It's not really hard to make one, but, to add an actual oval to the schedule, and if you could do it internationally, I think would be huge. Whether that be, some kind of scenario like, a temporary course like we had at LA for the Clash or whatever it might be. But if we could do a real oval internationally, to me, that's the holy grail. And I think that would connect with our fans and our partners and everybody in a way that tells the story of NASCAR in the best way possible.
It'd be a great way to kind of create that summer break. You could have some sort of stadium event
100%.
in wherever, Wembley Stadium,
Yep.
Mexico City, wherever that might be. But I think that there needs to be some sort of break in the middle of the year for the employees that you guys as owners need to get together and say, okay, we need 1 week off.
Yeah.
And everybody has to lock their doors so that those
Yes.
those employees can say, I'm going on vacation. But that's for another day.
Well, now let's talk about it.
Yeah.
I sit in a lot of those types of meetings, and I pushed really hard for that. This past fall, winter, whatever it was, of off season, like, guys, we need to do an industry shutdown because we have the 2-week Olympic break, which I think is great. It's perfect. Let the Olympics have their heyday. There's great stories. Everybody loves the Olympics. It's great for our sport to get a break and to not compete against the Olympics. Everybody wins. And so, I made a really hard push to the other team owners of, hey, let's all get together and shut down. We'll all just kind of lock our doors for a week or two. All the employees go home, go on vacation.
You need it.
Go spend some time with your kids, refresh, and kind of reload for what is the final half of the season, or the second half of the season, however you want to look at it. And unfortunately, that kind of fell on some deaf ears. But I think it's something that our sport needs to really, really consider. And, it's one of those things where all the team owners have to do it. Like, it can't just be like half of them, or it doesn't work. And it's really hard to get all the team owners into that kind of state of mind. But probably the biggest reason why I think it's important is, our sport really relies on kind of this, ambassador type relationship, whether it be with our fans or whether it be with kind of the junior level. And, we need those people. And it's more than just me. We need the whole garage area to be in a good mindset and to not be burnt out, so that it tells our story to those kids that might be in the stands or want to be a racer one day, or to the fans that are coming, to where, when they have engagements with our crew members or our drivers or whoever it might be, that those are good engagements and not the, man, I've been on the road for 30 straight weeks and I'm tired engagements, And I can't tell you how many stories I hear from fans where I'll meet them, and I bet you've probably heard these stories too, and they'll tell you a story like, hey, man, a couple weeks ago, I got tickets for the race, and I was in the garage area, and I met a couple of your crew members, and they were so nice to me. And, man, that just made my day, or my son's day, or my wife's day, or whatever it might be. And just the best experience, and that's why I'm back. That's why I came to another race. And you're like, man, I'm so glad to hear that. Like, our team members are ambassadors for our sport too. And I just think we lose sight of that sometimes.
Yeah. And, it's the simple things, right? Like, you go into the racetrack and all the team guys go into the same restroom. Have an attendant at that door. Pocono does it the best. They have an attendant at the door. It's always clean. There's always paper towel. There's always toilet paper. And you think about that stuff, and these guys and gals that go every single week, and they're gone for 20, 30 weeks in a row. That kind of stuff starts to matter. They want to sleep in their own hotel room.
The little things mean a lot.
Little things mean a lot. And
100%.
sometimes we forget about the team guys and gals in the garage, and they're really, like you say, they are part of the ambassadors for our sport and what they do. And so it's I'm glad to hear you say that. I'm glad that you're working towards trying to get those guys a guaranteed weekend off, because it would mean a lot for their families and that perception that they have towards who everybody's working towards, and making it right for them too, by making it better for them.
They deserve it, 100%.
But you mentioned the financials of going to Canada, and you mentioned all the other things. Where are we at with the charter stuff? Are we getting close? Are we getting close to the end of the road?
Yeah.
What in the world is happening?
Well,
I thought it was going to be done.
You've got different stakeholders, and the answer is going to be different. If you put every stakeholder in this chair, I think you'd get a different answer.
Yeah.
And, and I can't pretend that I speak for everybody else, but I can give you my point of view, right? Yeah. My point of view is that, the sport's very expensive. We have a lot of, inflation related matters that are, hitting NASCAR just as they're hitting everybody else. Oh, yeah. And, the cost to operate a team has never been more expensive. The next gen car came in, the car's a more expensive car. There's no way around it. It has to be, because it's built by third parties, and those third parties, they have to make a profit to be in business. Where when the teams manufactured the majority of the car, they didn't do it for a profit, not the manufacturing aspect at least. And so you have to cover that overhead of margins and inflation, which, drove some of the costs of the sport.
So do you ever think there's a road where the car is cheaper?
No, because nothing gets cheaper, right? Nothing ever gets cheaper. The challenge that we have, in my eyes, is not a cost challenge for the most part.
I meant just cheaper from how the team operates. That was really the big sell of going in was.
In fairness, it did. Like if you look at head counts in the teams, the head counts went down generally 10 to 20%.
Okay.
The problem is inflation hit everybody by another 20. So you kind of nullified all of those gains. And then the car costs more. By the time you're done, it's more money. But I don't know if it's necessarily fair to blame that on the next gen car. I honestly think the next gen car itself was a wash between the difference of third party versus, internal manufacturing. I think just inflation itself has been, this is my opinion, has been the killer here. And so that drives the charter negotiation, because the teams are just, they're screaming like, we have a huge deficit, with our budgets. And so, that kind of puts the whole charter negotiation in this unique place where the teams are just trying to figure out, how are we going to pay for things? The new TV, market, and that's changing almost every day, has put another kind of wrench in that, because, the more we move off of broadcast and we move to streaming services and all these other things, the harder it is, to kind of get the partners engaged the way we want to get them engaged. But that comes at a trade-off, because now there's more money. Like the streaming services, they pay the teams or NASCAR more money, and that transcends all the way down to the teams or passes through. So there's all kinds of trade-offs. At the end of the day, the conversation is mostly about, how do we create a stable platform to where the teams aren't losing money, and specifically how teams that are well managed don't lose money. And there are well-managed teams that are losing money, and that's a problem. And NASCAR is doing, a lot of work to try to help those teams, but it's kind of like, I feel like ultimately the challenges of the team charter negotiation, they ultimately kind of first principle make their way up to teams trying to be well-managed, teams trying to be solvent. And right now that's not the case in too many instances. Now, so some teams are cash flow positive.
Do you ever see, would it be better for your team to have 3 cars than it is 2? Where does that model work? What's the best car count number?
Yeah, 3 is definitely the best model.
Yeah.
4, you start to, I might get really nerdy on this. You start to get into these really expensive SG&A costs, which is, basically your front office, where you have all these people that you got to, put into service it. And 3, you can kind of use the same corporate structure as you can use for 2. When you get to 4, you have to really grow your corporate costs, and it's just really hard to be successful that way, financially at least. So, when Barney Visser came in, and he came in and really poured the coals on there with his deal with Toyota and his deal with Joe Gibbs, he really showed the competitive advantage to being smaller, like more focused and smaller.
Interesting.
But he did so, losing a lot of money.
Yeah.
Right. So the challenge that I see is when you get to 3 or 4 teams, you lose kind of focus with your competition group. But you get better with your finances, specifically at 3. So I think 3 is kind of that sweet spot.
So who's the best young driver right now that you would put in that third car? If just hypothetically saying RFK, like what would be the best fit for your company?
I think right now the best young talent in the garage, and kind of, I don't even know if it's fair to say in the garage, but that I see at least that could actually drive a cup car is probably Connor Zilisch. Just when I keep my eyes open and I watch him race, he's the one that I see has the most potential. You've got underneath him, there's some really good, I think, generational talent with Cruz and all those other, but he's not old enough right now. Is he 16 or 17?
17, yeah.
So he's not old enough. But right now, I think if you told me, Brad, go put a young driver in, make him a star, and here's all the money to do it, he's the guy I put in.
So he was racing go-karts with Keelan, and I recognized that he had that generational talent to be able to do the things that he's doing in a car right now. And I went and asked his dad one day, and I said, what's your plan here? What are you going to do with Connor? He said, well, I think we're going to go run some spec Miatas, and I'm going to make him go to school. And I told him, I said,
time out.
I don't know that that's the best decision that you could make with what he can do in this kart. He's like, you really think so? So we went out and we got him, the test with Silverhair to go up and drive the car. And he went up, and William Byron was there the day before. He went 1 second faster than William Byron did at VIR. And the Silverhair team was like, wow, this is unbelievable. And next thing you know, he was driving a race, and then he's gone on to do all the things that he has done.
He reminds me a lot of Logano.
Yeah. He's raced a lot too. And I think it's interesting too, because Connor Zilisch, Brent Cruz, they went over into the European karting system. Zane Smith spent some time over in I think for these kids, it really challenges that are at that high level and you realize they have that talent. It puts them so far outside of their comfort zone, and they have to learn how to tread water in a way that they never have and survive. And, they come back and then they start just to blossom like you've seen those kids do. So it's going to be fun.
If they survive it.
If they survive.
That's the key, right? And it's tough.
And you don't burn them out.
Yep.
And turn them off, so bad that they don't want to race anymore.
I look at that European karting system, and hands down the toughest environment for kids to race in. Expensive, but toughest. And if your kid can survive that, he can come back to the States, and we could probably make something out of it.
Yeah. I want to get back to kind of some of the things that you've done throughout your racing career. I know that you were racing the family truck. Tell me how you got into, and I know everything that happened with Dale Jr.'s Xfinity car at the time. Tell me about Dale. Did Dale call you? How did all of that go down to get into his car and wind up driving there?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like I was really lucky. I was competing in the what's now NASCAR Xfinity Series. Then it was the Busch Series with a really backmarker team. And, at that time, this was circa 06, 07. You'd go to a race and there'd be like 25, 30 cup drivers in it. And they weren't just cup drivers, but they were like cup drivers in cup team equipment, right? So at that point, like just making the show was like a pretty good deal if you were not a cup affiliated team or driver, right? And I started like just making the shows. Now I would run like 35th or 40th. Like they were like the finish.
You're making the shows.
But I was making the show, right? And I'd have a practice session where I'd be in the top 5 and things like that. And enough to like people would notice it, right? Like, well, this doesn't add up. And especially with the equipment. And it was enough to get some attention. And Michael Waltrip wanted to put me in his Xfinity car, and this would have been like the summer of '07. And it didn't come together for a number of reasons. And ultimately, probably my biggest break was when Ted Musgrave got suspended after a truck race in Milwaukee, and I filled in for him in Memphis in a truck race. And I ran really well, sat on the pole, led a lot of laps, had a shot to win. And it just felt like all these different things kind of came together. And I remember I was on an airplane flying back from Memphis, and I was flying commercial. And I landed I was living in the Detroit area, and I landed in Detroit, and I turned my phone on because it was on whatever airplane mode or whatever, and I had a voicemail from Dale Earnhardt Jr. And I remember thinking, this is the coolest thing ever. And I didn't get to talk to him that day because the way my flight was, he was racing by then. But I think I talked to him on a Monday or Tuesday after, and next thing I knew, I was flying up to North Carolina, and my world just flipped. And I went from this kind of survival driver, right? I'm just literally 20 some years old trying to survive week to week, not knowing how you're going to get to the racetrack, to having a legitimate ride and kind of, establishing myself. And that whole time period in my life, like, how you have different time periods in your life that you just remember and that you're like, you almost want to live it again. That was it for me. Like, that was like the best few weeks of my life.
What's it? What was it like working for a young Dale Earnhardt Jr.?
Yeah, it was
he a good influence?
Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, he had some really good. Dale has these like one-liners of wisdom, and they're like, you'll have a whole conversation with him, and you'll be like, I'm not sure where this is going, or I'm not sure I hear it, and then he'll sneak in like a one-liner of wisdom, and you're like, damn, that was actually really good. And he had a couple one-liners of wisdom that are a little less PG that he told me at that time, and that really stood out to me about how to race and how to be successful and how to get yourself with the right team. It was good. He was in a unique time in his life. If you remember, that was right when he was leaving DEI to go to Hendrick, so his plate was really full. And he was really stressed. One time he said to me something that I'm so proud of, and that, I'm thankful that he kind of had the courage or guts to say it, but I probably didn't recognize it at the time. But he's like, man, and I won't be able to get his quote exactly right. That was one of the toughest times of my life. And, I had all the things going on the Cup side, and the Xfinity team wasn't going to make it. It was wrecking every week. We didn't have cars. We were losing a lot of money. And he says, man, you saved that team and made it something that lived. It wasn't going to live. And he just told me, how thankful he was for that. And, with all the other stress he had in my life, that got kind of took off his plate, so to speak, right? And became something that could just live for him and his family and function. And I'm really proud of that. And that meant a lot to me when he said
Did you have to drink your first beer with Dale?
I did.
You did?
Yeah, I did. So, before I got the Miller deal, I didn't drink at all. I grew up in a household that didn't drink. And it wasn't like, I don't want to claim some holier than thou. It wasn't like a super religious thing, but my parents just didn't drink. Like, it just wasn't a thing. Now, some of their friends did, but like, there was no alcohol in our house growing up that I remember. And so I just never really had an interest in it. My dad was fairly strict in the sense that, I have an older brother. And my older brother was kind of like the heir to the throne in a lot of ways to my dad. And so that gave him almost a license with me to be like really, really strict. And growing up, he was like, if you want to drink, if you want to date, if you want to do any of those things, go ahead and do it. But just know I'm not helping you race at all. Like, it was just flat out. That was the deal. Like, so there was no drinking. There was no dating. There was none of those things. Cause like, I wanted to race. And my dad was very clear. Like, you even touch any of that stuff.
Done. I like that.
And so, and I don't think he meant it in a mean way. It was probably actually really good for me. Yeah. Like, if you're going to do this, you're going to be 100% focused, or we're not doing anything at all. I'm not wasting my time with this. Like, and, it actually served me really well. So I'm telling you that story because until I got to be, racing with Dale and kind of off on my own, like, none of that was even an option
right.
for me. Right. Because I couldn't race without my dad at least helping me in some way.
Well, I think that's a pretty unique story. And I think that as you go through your career, did you ever have a path that led from junior motorsports to Hendrick? Was there ever that conversation?
Yeah.
Because that seems
Absolutely.
like the path that goes that direction.
Yeah, I did. And, life takes in these, mysterious
you never know where it's
turns,
go.
right? Yeah. I did the whole contract with Rick and to take over the 5 car. And I still have the contract, by the way. I keep it in a safe, my Hendrick Motorsports Cup contract. And the way that went down, and at the time I was jaded. Now I'm not, just to be clear.
Yeah.
I'm not jaded about it. Now, it worked out great. He's in a good place. Obviously, Rick Hendrick is. I'm in a good place. So it's not like a, hey, I'm here to bash him. But yeah, I had a contract with Rick to take over the 5 car in 2010. Part-time and full-time in 2011. And I signed it in July of 2008. I really didn't want to announce it, and I told Rick Hendrick that at the time because I was competing in the Xfinity Series. And I knew that would – what's always tough, and you probably know this, is when you tell a team what the end is, like they start to fragment really quickly, right? And I knew that at that time, like, oh – and so I didn't want that kind of out there because I knew that my Xfinity team would fall apart and all that. It's like, we'll just sit on this, and when the time's right, we'll do an announcement sometime middle to end of 2009. That was kind of the plan. So we finished up the 2008 season, ended up 3rd in points, won a couple races. Like, this is going to be really good. I'm pumped about it. I go run the Cup car, a couple races, and they didn't go great. I ran the 5th team at Hendrick, which at that time you could do if you were,
right.
a young driver. And I went to Vegas and I crashed out and went to Dover and I didn't make the show. And I was like, ugh. It was kind of not a great start to 2009, but it was in a 5th team.
Yeah.
And my Xfinity car, I didn't have a great start either. And it was kind of like a rough patch. And then Mark went out and won that Phoenix race in the spring of 2009. And I'm like, oh, this isn't good. But I got a contract to be fine. And then I went out and ran the Cup race at Talladega next week and won the Cup race. I'm like, all right, I should be okay now, right? I've got a Cup win under my belt. Like, my contract pressure is a lot less. And I feel really good that in the right circumstances, I can be successful in Cup. And then, I got a call from Rick and he said, hey, I want you to come meet with me. I'm like, yeah, sure. Where, when, whatever. I mean, he says, yeah, can you come to my house? Which I thought was really interesting. I'm like, yeah, sure. I'd love to see this guy's house.
Yeah.
I went and met with him at his house, which was in downtown Charlotte. And he says, hey, congratulations on the Talladega win. And, that's really great for you and your family. And kind of solidifies you as, a guy that can compete at this level. And, I'm just like, yeah, this is great. I'm just soaking up. And he says, but I wanted to talk to you about something. I'm not going to move forward with your contract. I'm like, oh, okay. This is a big 180. It's like, yeah, Martin means a lot to me and he's running well. And, I think he wants to stay and I'm going to give him every opportunity to stay. And that means there's no room here for you. And maybe there is somewhere else and I'll try to help you get a deal somewhere else. And man, he's telling me all this and I'm like devastated, right? That obviously Hendrick has premier equipment and like not what I wanted to hear. Right.
Right.
And, I went through that summer of 2009, just kind of searching for what was next for me. And, inevitably the Penske thing came together, which was great. And I landed and I'm fine. But that was an interesting stretch in my life.
Yeah. And I think that the Penske piece is obviously we all know the success that you had there, and you get to the end of that road to have to make the decision at Penske.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Do I want to jump into the team owner? How did that whole scenario time out for you and finally say, okay, I'm done at Penske. I'm going to jump in with both feet at RFK?
Yeah. Well, if you go back to the start of my relationship with Penske, this is one of my stories that I tell people, and I'm always afraid I'm going to come off like a pure jerk. But the reality is this was how I felt, and I was just open about it.
Yeah.
I met with Roger in the summer of 2009 after things kind of went down with Rick Hendrick. And he said, hey, I want you to come drive for me. Come drive the 12 Cup car. And, I'll give you a 2-year contract, whatever it is, and we'll go. And I told him I'm not interested. Like at that time, the 12 Cup car was, 30 something in points.
Yeah.
And a lot of that blame was being placed on David Stremme, who was the driver. And I didn't think that was really all that fair. I didn't think the cars were very fast. And I thought that was really hard for him to manage. And I looked at it and said, honestly, this isn't a great opportunity, Mr. Penske. And, the only way I'll do it is if I can do it my way. And I kind of gave him terms, like, here's how I'm going to do it. Like, I want control of the crew chief. I want control of, I want an Xfinity team that runs full time. So I have a depth chart of people to pull from. And I basically made a list of demands for him. And none of them were like salary. It wasn't like, hey, I want a bunch of money to do. Like, no, none of that. Like, that wasn't. All I cared about was, can we win? Can this thing turn into a winner? And Mr. Penske looked at me like, you're 24. At that time, I'd have been 25. You're 25 years old. I'm a racing legend and champion. You're not going to tell me what to do. And he basically just like, get out of here.
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, well, I'm not going to do it if it's not the right deal. And this is what it's going to take to be the right deal. And I walked out of that office.
Wow.
And so my agent was with me, and my agent was kind of like, I can't believe you did that. Like, well, I mean, honestly, this isn't a good deal. Like, why would I take it? I mean, I don't need a bad deal. And there was other opportunities that were kind of peripheral. Like, I'll go work on those. And so I remember I was at my friend TJ Major's house about 2 months later, and I got a call from my agent, and he said, hey, Brad, I just talked to Roger Penske. He agreed to everything you asked for. He wants to know if you'll come sign it right now. Like, wait, what? How did we go from this to that?
Right.
And next thing I know, we had the 22 Xfinity team. We changed a lot of the team. We even changed the paint scheme on the car, like the entire list. And that deal came together. And I'm like, wow, this is
just
great.
how you wanted it.
Yeah, it's exactly what I wanted, right? And it took some time to turn that team around, but it ended up getting it to be something great. And, I think a lot of people think of Penske and where it is today, probably that are listening, but Penske at that time was not in a real good place. And now it's in a great place. And I'm proud of that ride. And as you kind of fast forward, to, when I left, like I wanted to keep going. I kind of got to that same spot with Mr. Penske where I'm like, hey, here are the things we need to do for this to be a team that can be successful for the next 1 to 2 decades, right? Beyond even when I'm driving, like we need to make these changes, and I kind of fell into that same place with Mr. Penske where it was like, hey, you're 30 some years old. I'm 80 some years old. I know what I'm doing. And, this is the way it's going to be. And I don't really want you to tell me what to do. And I just
didn't feel right.
It didn't sit right.
Yeah.
And, I really wanted a chance at team ownership, which wasn't as big of a part of staying at Penske, but it was a big part to me. I wanted to be able to steward a team.
Yeah.
And ownership's part of that, but it's not all of it, right? And I just didn't feel like I had that opportunity or ever would have that opportunity. And knowing that, at some point your career is going to end. I just couldn't see myself like And you know, Kevin, how it is. Like, I couldn't see myself in the shoes of one of these guys that kind of shows up to the racetrack and like, yeah, I used to compete here, and that's it. Like,
Yeah.
and not have any meaningful role in the industry. And I was really wanting that, and didn't see a path to it at Penske, and that kind of opened my eyes and ears to other opportunities. And the one here at what's now RFK came up, and it was kind of a no-brainer for me.
Yeah, and you guys have made just such a great run at it, and I think that your leadership and guidance through all of that has put RFK back on track, and you guys have put the cars in victory lane, and I think all that is very noticeable, especially within the industry, and I think that it seems like such a big leap from everybody outside of the industry, but I think in the industry, having that guy that knows how to lead a team, that can get in and out of the car, but also be able to compartmentalize those things, and also lead the people inside the walls of the company on a day-to-day basis is pretty impressive, and I think you guys have done a great job. So how many years is that? I mean, how many years do you think you can drive it?
Well, you know, Kevin, I told somebody
40, right?
This last week, somebody asked me, how many more years do you want to go? I says, well, I left the Coke 600 thinking if I had 5 more laps, I could win the race. You know, and the rain came, and I got out of the car after the race and said, I have 10 more years left.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then, the week or two before, I was in North Wilkesboro in an all-star race, and I think we ran next to last.
Yeah.
And I was like, I can't do this any longer. Next week, I'm out. You know what I mean?
That's next gen racing.
Yes. And so you go through this emotional roller coaster. Health wise, I feel great. So, it's not really a health thing. It's really a mental thing of how long can you endure the emotional roller coaster? And one of the big kind of factors for me is, and I'm sure this is definitely something you can relate to. Like, I want my kids to see me winning races.
Yeah.
And I don't know, there's a lot of people that say when a race car driver has a family that, he loses, a little bit of his edge or whatever it might be. Like, to some degree, I almost feel the opposite.
Yeah.
Like,
you want to feel like a winner to your
yes,
kids.
I want to feel like a winner to my kids, right? And, winning at Darlington earlier this year and having my family there. Oh, it's just.
We could see the emotion.
Oh, it's the best,
that's a whole
right?
different emotion.
So awesome, right? Yeah. And you've been there 100%. And I want that for my kids as a core memory, because I had that with my dad.
Yes.
When my dad won races when I was a kid, I remember being in victory lane. I remember being like, I'm not going to have been that tall, but like jumping up and down and excited. I want that for my kids. And, I think that connects to how long I want to race, because my youngest kid is, 7 months old. So, he was in victory lane, but you're going to remember that victory lane. Like, so that almost serves as like the opposite of what I think the stereotype is like, I want to go longer for my kids, because I want, especially my youngest son, I want him to be in victory lane with me one day.
Well, I love it. And you're doing a great job. And so we got 2 more questions.
Okay. I know I talk long, so you're like, you had this whole list of questions. I'm not getting to all these.
That's typical. I write all these questions because I never want to leave anything out, and you only use half of them. But 2 consistent questions that we have on this show. What was your first car? What was it and where is it?
94 Chrysler LeBaron. It was red. It was my mom's car. It was 8 years old when I had it. It was tired.
Yeah.
I never crashed it, although my dad crashed it.
Oh, really?
Which is it was freaking hysterical.
Yeah.
Like, I remember when I was getting my driver's license, how much he'd pick on me. Like, you're just going to tear this thing up. And one day I had it sitting in our driveway at home, which we had a real small house back in Michigan. It was a small driveway. And it had snowed that day, and my dad was turning in the driveway, and he got in the snow, and he slipped, and it slid right in the side of it, and T-boned it. It took the door out and everything. Man, that was one of the best moments of my life. Yeah. I never had to hear that again.
You've had your ass ripped so many times for tearing your dad's stuff up, and now he's tearing your car up.
Yeah. Where is it now? I have no idea.
So did you sell it? Wreck it?
I didn't wreck it.
It's just gone.
I don't remember how. I don't remember where it went, but I don't know. I think we must have sold it.
Yeah.
Cars, when you're a race car driver, are always so interesting because, and I never owned it, by the way. My mom and dad always owned it, but it was my first car. I didn't own my first car until I was like 26 years old.
What'd you buy?
I bought one of the first Teslas.
Really?
Yep. I got my first Cup contract in 2009. I had a friend who said, man, you ought to go check out this Tesla thing.
Yeah.
I went to the California race in 2009. I went to one of the few Tesla dealerships. Couldn't have been any bigger than this room right here. I walked in the door, test drove one of their electric cars. Like, oh, this is different. Whatever. And I had a manufactured car. So it wasn't going to be my daily driver, but I wanted to own a car. I test drove the car, drove it back into the dealership, and I I think I'll buy one. And I, put a deposit down. The lady was at the door. And again, there might've been like 5 people working there. This was like before nobody even knew who Tesla was at the time. Right. And the lady goes, oh yeah, the owner's in the back. Do you want to talk to him? And no, just put the deposit down. I got to go get to this appearance I have for,
that's great.
For Hendrick. Cause it was a Hendrick appearance. Really? I'm like, yeah, but thanks. Yeah. Just let me know when it'll be ready. Like 6 months later it came in. Right.
That's awesome.
It was January 2010. So, that's one of my many Elon Musk stories is I blew off meeting him to go to a appearance.
Well, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah,
well,
that was a bad move, by the way. I regret that.
Don't do that again.
Don't do that one. No, that was a bad one.
Well, thanks for taking the time today. I appreciate you coming in the studio. It always makes it a lot more conversational. So thanks for taking the time.
You're welcome. Next time I won't wear the same clothes.
Yeah,
I promise.
We color coordinated today. So thanks for taking the time.
You're welcome.
I want to thank Brad for coming in today. It's not always that we get to have our guest in studio, and everybody for listening. We encourage everybody to follow us on YouTube, and even if you have to listen and watch us on social media, we encourage that at Harvick Happy Pod. Thanks for listening today, and we'll see you next week.